The Battle of Baedan, a key event in early medieval Britain which repelled Saxon expansion for a generation. Surviving histories from as early as the 9th century describe the Britons as being led by a warrior known as Arthur. Most details of the battle are shrouded in myth and uncertainty, most intriguingly, the location. One popular theory is that the battle was fought in Mynydd, Baedan and Glamorgan. The spelling and pronunciation are on the face of it a close match. Linguists have, however, dismissed the connection. Gwynedd Opius, for instance, calls it just a superficial similarity. The earliest Welsh records of both names are subtly different too, so generally they are thought to be distinct locations, but these records only appear centuries after the actual event. The Mynydd Baedan theory was popularised in the 1980s by Marmite historians Wilson and Blackett, who specifically placed the battle in an area known as Maes Cadlawr, which they translate as field of the battle site. This is acceptable as a translation, in my opinion. Opponents of Wilson and Blackett dismiss this and say that the connection only began with them. So can we find references to this before the 1980s? I wanted to find out, so I went to my local library, found an old history book, and had a look. The book I picked up was from the 1870s and called Hanes Morgannwg by Dafydd Morgannwg, also known as David Watkin Jones. As well as being a credible historian, the author was a geologist, a bard, and a successful competitor at the Eisteddfodau, and seems to be generally regarded as a great cultural and literary figure of his day. I must confess that I haven't read the entire book, but references to King Arthur and the Battle of Baden were easy to find. Under the subheading Llangynnwyd, as I expected, the author began discussing the Battle of Baden. Now, the copy of the book that I have is in the Welsh language, so I will translate the text, but I will also read both languages, just so there's no uncertainty about what's being said. Cytuno haneswyr I Arthur ymladd un o'i brif rwydrau mewn lle a elwir Mont Baden ger Carbadon medd rhai. I translate this as historians agree that Arthur fought one of his greatest battles in a place known as Mont Baden near Carbadon, according to some. Dafydd Morgannwg goes on, yr un sydd yn anhawdd ei benderfynu yw, pa un, a'i gerbath neu ante Morgannwg mae'r Mont Baden a sonio haneswyr amdano. I translate this as what's difficult to decide is whether the Mont Baden recorded by historians is located near Bath or in Glamorgan. The author then says, nid yw fod Bath a Baden mor debyg i'w gilydd yn un prawf, mae ger Carbadon Bath yr ymladdwyd y frwydr. Ac o'r tu arall, nas gellir profi hynny, mae fod y fath liaws olion amddiffynfeydd ar fynydd Baden, Llangynnwyd, a'r enw'n cyfateb agos yn hollol i Mount Baden, yn rhoi'n i'r fath o hawl i gredu mai yma yr ymladdwyd prif frwydr, y Brenin Arthur. I translate this as Baddon and Baden are not so similar as to prove that Carbadon, Bath, is where the battle was fought. On the other hand, although it can't be proved, the many remains of defences on Mynydd Baden, Llangynnwyd, and as the name corresponds almost completely to Mont Baden, gives us the right to believe that King Arthur's greatest battle was fought here. Now I know that this author's opinion isn't definitive proof that the battle was fought here, but Dafydd Morgannwg, writing 150 years ago, does clearly articulate a tradition that connects Mynydd Baden with the Battle of Baden. Some modern historians place the battle here too. I found an author that largely supports the Wilson, Blackett and Gilbert interpretation. He places the battle at a Bulwarkau hill fort nearby. The ramparts are still clearly visible on this satellite image to this day. The author proposes a 3-day siege by the Saxons. The Britons then broke out of the hill fort on the 3rd day, slaughtering the enemy with the advantage of higher ground. It's interesting that Dafydd Morgannwg compares the cases for placing the battle in Bath or Glamorgan. Bath does have a good case. I think the historians have shown that by the early 6th century, the Saxons had established territories in the south and east of England and were expanding into the west of Britain. It's plausible that a decisive battle was fought here for control of the west of England and the Severn. Geoffrey of Monmouth places the battle in Bath, specifically on Salisbury Hill. Dafydd Morgannwg points out there are similarities in the names. But going back to Mynydd Baden, Wilson and Blackett interpret the places mentioned in Breuddwyd Granabwy as evidence for placing the battle in Glamorgan. It's very interesting and I might cover it in another video. It's also my opinion that Mynydd Baden was an important military target. It lies close to the most passable route across the challenging terrain of uplands Glamorgan. Controlling this route, which today is known as the Glamorgan Ridgeway, was of great strategic importance. The route runs from Caerphilly to Margam and still shows the remains of ancient defences, many of which were explored by the late great Ross Broadstock as part of his Britain's Hidden History project. I recommend checking this content out if you haven't already done so. The toponymy of the area also records great battles and associations with King Arthur. I've already discussed Maes Cadlawr, but there's Mynwen de Milwyr, the mighty hill fort of Rhys Saeson, Arthur's Butt Hill, Cadair Arthur, Mynydd Baedan, and many more. Some other interesting information on King Arthur from Hanes Morgannwg is the author tells us of a historian who believed that King Arthur's final battle was on Mynydd Baedan, and that from here his body was transported to Ynys Avalon. Dafydd Morgannwg tells us he didn't agree with this himself, and that every other historian he knew believed that Arthur's final battle was in Camlan, which Dafydd Morgannwg believed was in Camelford in Cornwall in the year 542. It's an interesting interpretation, but probably a bit mixed up. I think that the information from Dafydd Morgannwg overall supports the theory that links King Arthur with Mynydd Baedan in Glamorgan. So I'm going to leave it there for now, and maybe I'll come back to this topic again another day.